Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Bauer-Wu, joining you from Charlottesville, Virginia. My clinical background is oncology, mental health, and hospice, and I'm delighted to serve on the Content Advisory Board of Keener App and to be the moderator of this great session on grief and anger for the second Nurse Wellbeing Week. And I'm joined by three terrific panelists. The first I'll introduce is Paula Blake-Beckford, and Paula is a neonatal nurse and mind-body skills facilitator based in Southern Florida. And next is Jonathan Bartels, and Jonathan is a palliative care liaison nurse and a clinician resilience expert and facilitator, and he is based in Central Virginia. And third panelist is Paula Papedo, and Paula is a psychiatric clinical nurse specialist based in Northern California. So this is a really great panel, because as you can see, we have great clinical diversity, and we're also from different geographic areas around the country. And so I think that the different perspectives will be really rich. And in this panel, we are exploring grief and anger. And these feelings, whether recognized or not, are normal for nurses to experience. And how we cope with these feelings can have a lasting impact on a nurse's well-being, emotional and physical well-being. And so in this session, what we're going to do is we're going to unpack grief and anger, and we're going to discuss effective strategies for coping with these feelings. And thereby, we hope that this will lay the foundation for a more sustainable career in nursing. So I'll begin with the first question to Janice. So let's just begin, Janice, by unpacking grief and anger. Maybe you can describe each one, and generally speaking, not specific to being a nurse or working in healthcare, but just as regular people. What's grief and anger, and how are they similar and different?
Well, I'll start with grief. Grief is universal to all of us, particularly anyone who has been a nurse in the healthcare setting, because death and loss are a part of grief, and we all experience that in our work, in our lives, in our personal lives, and they all come together. And it really is about dealing with loss or our perception of loss. It can be sometimes other than death. It can be loss of body function, loss of our ability to work, to be a part of a group. So there are all kinds of loss, but there can be grief associated with any kind of loss. And in this day and age, in this past year and a half, in which we have been on the front lines experiencing, working with families who have not been able to be with loved ones as they are dying. There is so much grief that goes on in the loss of that loved one, but also in the loss of the ability to be with them. So people are just overwhelmed at this time with grief. And again, we can't separate ourselves from what is currently going on in the world and in our lives. I doubt that most of us have experienced so much grief and so much loss at one time in our careers. And that in itself creates anger, which is just a coping mechanism when we are overwhelmed and not able to meet all of the demands that are placed upon us. And in nursing right now, there are many reasons legitimate reasons to feel angry. Many of them have to do with being overworked, overburdened. We may not be able to get our breaks and our time that helps us restore during our shift. We are short-staffed across the country. We have many issues going on that touch us directly. Vaccines might be one of them, of coworkers as well as patients that we treat. And so we're sometimes overwhelmed with our feelings of, oh my goodness, can I do anything about this? And I will talk about coping with this, but it's really important to recognize what you have control over and what you don't have control over. And those things can help you cope with being angry. And obviously that in the workplace, that might come out as irritability with coworkers, shortness with patients, and many different aspects of how we interact with others.
It seems that while grief and anger are different, they're very much on a similar continuum, and that oftentimes part of grief is also feeling angry, and a lot of times our anger is fueled by loss and grief. So I'd like to go to you, Jonathan, and you've worked in palliative care a long time. Before that, you worked in the ER, and palliative care, just the specialty itself, is working with people at the end of life, and there's a lot of grief associated with that. And so I'd love to just hear from you, any words of wisdom that you have, maybe some stories, a story that you could share of how you've navigated lots of grief, and how you can still stay really compassionate and present and caring and loving while also having those losses.
Sure, Susan. It's a huge burden. I'll never forget. A friend of mine was teaching me about grief in college, and grief is about loss. It's about physical loss. It's about emotional loss. Very much what Jana was talking about. It's also about loss of even objects, and even about loss of things we thought we could do and could not do anymore. Working in palliative care has been definitely a lesson, because there was no real teaching when it came to the reality of working with it. And it's a matter of processing that, and how do we process that grief in a way that's going to be therapeutic and not necessarily be harmful. What I found is and I did this is a trial and error. At some points, I would hide the grief, and it was almost like a wound that you cover, and if you put more bandages over the wound, you cover it up, and you don't see the weeping, you don't see the leaking, you don't see the festering that happens. But as we all know in our profession, the more you cover up a wound, the more you hide it from air, the more you hide it from being able to heal on its own. And what I've learned is that we need to cut away those proverbial bandages and allow our wounds to heal. And finding ways to do that is what's really helped me in my own career kind of float through it and get out on the other side. Death is a part of life, and it's going to be a part of life. Loss is a part of life. It's going to be a part of life. Navigating that, it doesn't have to be something that destroys us, but it can be something that molds us. And that's really where I come out on the other side with that, is that I've not been broken. I've been made whole by allowing myself to be molded through the process.
So I think, John, your example and how you've approached this, many years of experiencing grief in nursing is really admirable. And I also think you're unique. because I think that in general, nursing, we have a culture that tends to bypass these feelings of grief and even anger too. It's like, we're kind of taught in a way to hold it in, and that we just have to show up and be happy and be there for everybody else. And can you share an example of what you maybe witnessed in a colleague of just holding it in and how it can take its toll? How does it show up? How does bypass grief just show up? How does it show up if you just try to keep it covered, keep the wound covered? How does it show up? How do we treat each other? How do we treat our patients? How does it affect our own well-being? From what, just based on your experience?
Definitely, it's the more we hide. I remember asking someone to do a meditation, and I asked her, we're going to sit, we're going to breathe, and I ask you to kind of hold that space and be silent. And this particular nurse, and I've heard this over and over with nurses who've had what I call secondary trauma, which is, experiencing the loss over and over, whether it be children or adults or infants or whatever. It compiles. And what people do is they suppress it. And when I asked her to hold the space and be silent, she said, whenever I hold my space to be silent, I just break down and cry. I can't even hold that space. And it would be one thing to hear that from one person. I've heard it a lot. It's a difficult space because that silence is where we slow down, and that silence is also where it percolates and pops up. In terms of colleagues, what happens is people become dysfunctional a little bit. Their activities and their actions are a little bit more caustic than maybe they want it to be. And it's not intentional. It's just that amount of grief that we carry. And when I talk about grief, again, I want to spread that beyond. It's the loss that we've had in this past year and a half that Janice talked about, where my system failed me. My government failed me. My institutions failed me. And yet I have to keep coming and showing up. That compiled on the day-to-day grief that we have, where people are coming and they're dying and we're being told, you can't come in to see your loved one. Or you may have 7 kids in your family, but you only get 1 or 2 to come in. That just drives a knife through anyone's heart. And that drives a knife through all of our hearts, because we don't want it to be that way, but we also understand what can happen if we don't take care of that. And it manifests, obviously, Susan, in anger. People get angry at each other. People are short with each other. People are nasty. People just don't have enough bandwidth. And I hear that over and over again, man. My bandwidth, and I know that, my bandwidth is stretched thin at times. And it's hard. It's really, really hard.
So my next question is for Paula, and it is about your work in the NICU and the power of peer support. I just would love to hear your experiences of peer support and the value of working with your colleagues and supporting one another.
Yeah, absolutely, Susan. I really want to start with, peer support really begins with supporting ourselves, right? It's about having a sense of presence for the grief and the anger that's showing up, right? And that grief and anger could not necessarily, as Janice shared, be about death, but most certainly about loss, and a loss of our lifestyle, or ability to hug each other, or to just not have to wear a mask. That anger that bubbles up around that, and just being able to support ourselves and acknowledge our own grief and anger and frustration and everything else that comes with that, right? So in the environment that I work in, and what we've been trying to work on is just having a space, creating a space for our peers and ourselves to come into presence, right? To have a mind body medicine space where we can practice skills um, that allow us to, acknowledge what's going on for ourselves and process the emotions, right? And and also having space where we can express the anger and the frustration and the grief and not be judged in that space, right? It is a space where um, all emotions are welcome, right? And what's been very useful lately, I would say for myself, I have been processing my own anger around issues with journaling and what's called dialogue with the symptom or with that emotion, having a conversation with that emotion and scripting it out and speaking very frankly to it. And what that helps me to do, and those whom I share this practice with, is to transform that emotion and to gain the wisdom that that emotion is here to share with us. As Jonathan so insightfully talked about the bandage and the wound and covering it up, it's about letting it breathe, giving it space to breathe, and we know from Rumi, where the wound is, the light enters, right? The wound is where the light enters. And so allowing that space for the light to enter so that we can heal and transform some of these, what we were taught. Certainly I was taught not to express my anger and keep it on the wraps. That if we keep it on the wraps and keep that bandage, keep covering it up, it festers in our bodies and it causes illness. And we present ourselves in our not best versions of ourselves. It's not our best, most compassionate self. So just taking that time, first of all, to take care of ourselves so that we can really fully be present for each other and really provide each other with that peer support that we're so needing at this time in everything that's going on.
And listening to you, it got me thinking about a term that I've heard of that I think is really resonant here. It's emotional contagion, which is basically how our emotions are contagious and how when we're around others that are experiencing emotions, we can, they're contagious. We're all familiar working in healthcare, germs are, get spread and are contagious. Well, our emotions are contagious as well. And so how we are interacting with each other makes a difference. And so if we're all like sitting around and like letting our emotions out is really important, right? But if we're only venting anger, is there a chance, is there a risk that it's just gonna become one big giant bitch session? So I'm curious, Janice, what do you think about that? What just this idea of emotional contagion, and then as we're dealing with these difficult emotions, and we want them to be resolved and to work through them, but how do we do them without getting stuck in a spiral that's going to kind of bring us all down?
Yeah, and certainly emotions are contagious. There's no question when there's anger around, people are getting angry at one another, and when there's burnout, compassion fatigue, all of the things, vicarious traumatization, all of those things can create a negative spiral to a certain extent. And what has been helpful is to have almost like a normal process of we get together, we can talk about these things, and then we can figure out what we're going to do to take care of ourselves or what we can do to take care of one another. Working with our administrative partners, our nurse managers, can be really helpful to say, this is what we need. These are some things that can make a difference. I think that it is the helplessness that people feel that generates just complaining and not being able to do anything about it. There are some things that we were able to do in our hospital system that have just sort of, because they became routine, became easier and easier for people to use appropriately and not just bitch, which is critical incident stress debriefing kinds of things, but in a less formal way, not one that takes 5 days to get together. And it might be simply, I work on a psych consult nursing service, and part of what we do is support nursing. And so nurse managers or nurses on the unit can call and say, we need a debriefing. This is going on. We've had so many deaths, or we've had something going on, and we can come together, support one another. Yes, hear the complaints, figure out, are there things that we can do that might change it, might be helpful, and then actually do it. I think it's the sense of complaining without any resolution or any support or any change that makes it become sort of a negative spiral. So it's really important to have people around to guide that in a way that doesn't allow it to be just a complaint, just a bitch session, which you need sometimes, but it's then what? It's the then what, and how do we support one another? And sometimes it's a matter of having a buddy system, very much like Paula was talking about, where you know who you can go to. And the other piece that's happened so little, but it's really something that we can be cognizant of and make a commitment to as a unit, is to notice the positive and to support one another. Great job with that patient. Do you need 10 minutes? I'll take over your caseload so that you can spell yourself after such a difficult situation. Having nurse, I guess, charge nurses and nurse managers, but particularly charge nurses, trained as a group to be able to say, this person went through this, let's figure out who can spell them and who can support them. And when you feel like you're getting that, then the complaints don't feel in vain, and they also don't continue.
Thank you. I'm gonna change gears a little bit and go back to you, Jonathan, and relates to grief and the pause. So a lot of people are familiar with the pause, but not everybody. And it's something that I know that when I was at the University of Virginia, you implemented there, and now it's been shared widely across many institutions and all over the world. And how about just walking people through about what the pause is and how you have found it, like real world, how you have found it to make a difference.
Sure. It manifested after a retreat with you and Joan Halifax with Being with Dying. I was given a kind of a manifest to go out there and change my world. And the retreat we were on was a death and dying retreat. And I was the only one that came from an ER at that point. And I went into, my work environment. I'm looking around going, wow, what do I do? And I noticed one day the response to death within the ER was, it wasn't something I paid attention to. And then all of a sudden my eyes were open and I saw the response was, taking off your gloves, throwing them down, walking away, being really angry or being frustrated, because we're there to save lives. And when we can't, the response was, man, we didn't save a life, and we just walked away. And I'd seen a chaplain stop a room at one point, and I'm like, that's really cool. But that whole praying thing, that's really cool, but I think it can be more inclusive. So I changed it and modified it. And the next time I saw a death, and it was a pretty traumatic trauma we were working on, I asked the room, could we stop and take a moment? Could we take a moment just to honor this patient in this bed? Before they came here, they were alive, they were living, they were loved, and they loved others. Could we just take a moment to honor that in silence and in our own way? And could we also honor the work that we've done, honor the efforts we put in, honor the care we've done, and just do that in silence for a moment? Would that be okay? And the room stopped, and they were cool with it, and we did it. And that was the beginning of the pause. I thought it was a Captain Obvious moment, and I still think it is. That, yes, we should honor the death. I heard the other day, it was beautiful. I met this woman, and I was walking down the hallway, and this patient had just died, and she was a chaplain, and she was bringing some chaplain residents by, and I said, hey, would you mind if we did a pause for this guy in this room? And she brings her chaplain residents in, and she said, do you know about it? And she told them about it. And then I looked at her and I said, yeah, some freak started that. And she looked at me and kind of, what? And I was like, no, I started it years ago. And she was like, oh my God, I'm from New Orleans, and I did it there. And she said, the pushback I got from people at times where it hurts to do that. And she said, it's okay to hurt. That's okay. That's why we do this, just to honor. And it's really important to honor that life. It's our last rite of passage that any of us will go through as human beings. And it's important that we honor that. And we don't just walk away from that, but we take that time to just take that moment. Families are affected by that, and I had no idea. When they see it happening, it's a physical act of compassion. It's you acting out compassion, but I'm not doing that falsely. I'm doing that because I'm honoring that patient. But the families were completely moved by that. And every week I get reach out from across the country and across the world, different episodes of this happening. And the touching moment I heard was in New York City, right around the time we are now with this COVID, where ERs are jammed, we're running out of space to put patients, and a doc told his residents, when that patient dies, take a moment, put your hand on their chest, and say their name, and then hold that space in silence. And to know that that can be done anywhere at any time, and it can be done for expected deaths, it can be done for unexpected deaths. The growth of this particular act, it's limitless in terms of when and when it can't be done. And it's really, for me, helped to make my own life better, and to hear that other people are affected by it and it helps them. But it's not a panacea. I always tell them that. It's not going to fix everything. I'll never forget holding a 5-year-old in my hands, and the pause didn't make that death any better. Didn't make it happy, didn't make it go away, but it's one step in the right direction towards finding acts that we can heal ourselves with. And this is the first step in a 1,000-mile walk, but it's a first step.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Susan.
But, not only for sharing your wisdom here, but really for having the courage and wanting to make a change and to make a difference. And you woke up. You woke up in where you worked. You listened to your heart, and then you took the courageous step of essentially inserting 45 seconds into a regular clinical day that then makes all the difference in the world to the life of the person who's died, as well as to the whole culture of your colleagues. So thank you. Really, really powerful.
Thank you. I open up 45 seconds for hundreds and thousands of people around the world because it gave them permission to do it too.
We all have 45 seconds, right?
Yeah.
We all do. I'm going to jump in. Is Paula there?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge what Jonathan said, and the fact that the pain, it doesn't make the pain easier having the pause, but it does keep the heart open. Because as we imagine going through, or we not imagine, we're experiencing it, going through all this loss and grief and death and everything else that comes with it, um, to be strong, we might be so inclined to, close the heart a little bit. And, we want to keep the heart open to be compassionate, to continue with our compassionate work that we're doing. And so just honoring the life in that way, and bearing witness, to the loss and to our own pain. I think that's crucial for us to continue doing this work compassionately.
I agree. And I think that you, Jonathan, you reminded me of everyone has different ways of marking the importance of the work that they do and the connection that they have with people. And it is so unique to each person how they might do that. I too have had such difficult time when I'm working with children and families who lose children. That seemed to be one of the hardest for me in my career. And I happen to have a garden, a lovely garden and one of the things that I did was I planted these rose bushes after every time that I lost a child that I worked with. And years later, every time they only have first names. I could never remember a last name, but every year these roses bloom, and I think of those children, and it just gives me a sense of just joy that they live on in some way.
Wow. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Jonathan. What I'm taking away from this panel is a theme of connection, and that being in connection is healing. It helps us to skillfully navigate grief and anger and all of the challenges that we face as nurses working in healthcare. And for all of us, all of you that are here, is to remember that you're not alone, and that we're part of this amazing community that's doing really good in the world. And so whenever you're feeling alone, reach out and reach out, put your hand out, put your heart out, make eye contact, and just connect with another, connect with your colleagues, connect with your patients, and that will help us. So thank you all. Keep up the great work.